What the Study Says.
Welcome back to What the Study Says. I'm Dr. Kai.
And I'm Dr. May. So let's dive right into something many of us have probably thought about, maybe after a drink or two.
Does that little bit of Dutch courage actually, make you better at speaking another language?
It's such a classic question, and honestly, perfect fodder for the Ig Nobel Prize.
Ah, yes, the Ig Nobels. They celebrate science that first makes people laugh, then makes them think. Love that.
Exactly. And today we're looking at the 2025 Ig Nobel Peace Prize winner, this study. It's called Dutch Courage: Effects of Acute Alcohol Consumption on Self-Ratings and Observer Ratings of Foreign Language Skills.
Right. So our mission today is to unpack the science behind this very popular idea. Does it actually hold up?
Well, the common belief, the anecdote, is pretty strong. Lots of language learners feel like a drink helps them loosen up, speak more freely.
Yeah, less self-conscious maybe.
That's the idea. But scientifically speaking, the expectation was actually the opposite. Alcohol usually impairs executive functions.
Okay, so things like stopping yourself from saying the wrong word or juggling vocabulary.
Precisely. Inhibitory control, working memory stuff, you really need to speak a second language well. So the theory predicted, worse performance.
So you got this clash, what people feel versus what the brain science suggests. How did they test it?
They ran a neat experiment. They recruited 50 native German students, all of whom had recently learned Dutch.
Okay, German speakers learning Dutch. Got it.
Then they split them randomly. Half got a beverage with a low dose of alcohol. They were aiming for a blood alcohol content of about 0.4 per mil.
0.4 per mil. Just to clarify for everyone listening, how much is that really? Is that like one beer less?
It's quite low. It depends on the person, of course, body weight and so on, but it's calculated to be a dose that might cause some mild relaxation or disinhibition, but definitely not, proper intoxication, not slurring or stumbling.
Okay, a very mild buzz, essentially. And the other half?
They got a control drink, just water.
Yeah.
Then everyone had a standardized 2-minute chat in Dutch.
All right, makes sense. So let's get to the results. First off, did the alcohol group feel like they did better? Did they get that Dutch courage confidence boost?
Well, this is the first surprise. Based on the self-ratings, the alcohol had basically no significant effect. They didn't report feeling more confident or fluent in Dutch compared to the water group.
Oh, wait, really? So the whole courage part of Dutch courage didn't actually show up in how they felt?
Apparently not. They didn't perceive themselves as being any better, which kind of challenges the core idea right there.
Okay, that is interesting. No subjective boost. But what about objectively? What did outside listeners think? Science predicted they'd do worse, right?
Right, that was the hypothesis. But here's where it gets really fascinating. They had native Dutch speakers who were blind to which group was which rate the recordings. And the observers rated the alcohol group as significantly better speakers.
Better, not worse.
Significantly better. The effect size was quite large, actually, suggesting it wasn't just a tiny fluke. It was a noticeable difference.
Wow. Okay, so they didn't feel better, but native speakers judged them as better. Where did that improvement come from? Was it grammar, vocabulary?
That's what the researchers look into next. And it turns out the scores for grammar, for vocabulary use, even for the quality of their arguments, they were pretty much the same between the two groups.
So what was better then?
Pronunciation. The big difference, the reason for the higher overall ratings, was that the alcohol group was rated as having significantly better pronunciation.
Pronunciation. So it wasn't about knowing more Dutch. It was about how they physically sounded speaking it.
Exactly. It seems the alcohol didn't make them smarter in Dutch, but perhaps less inhibited physically.
So the mechanism might be less about courage or confidence and more about relaxation, reducing anxiety.
That seems to be the most plausible explanation they discussed. We know alcohol, especially at low doses, can have disinhibiting effects. It might reduce that specific language anxiety some people feel.
That tension you get when trying to speak a language you're not fluent in.
Right. And if you reduce that tension, maybe your mouth muscles relax a bit, you articulate more clearly, more like a native speaker, even if your grammar isn't suddenly perfect. It's a performance effect, not a knowledge effect.
Okay, but the dosage here feels absolutely critical. You mentioned 0.4 per mil.
Crucial. The researchers really emphasized this. It was a low dose. They explicitly warned that higher levels of alcohol would almost certainly lead to the negative effects everyone expects: slurred speech, cognitive impairment, worse performance overall.
So nobody should take this as advice to, get tipsy before their language exam.
Definitely not. This finding seems very specific to that threshold where you might get a slight reduction in anxiety without the broader impairment kicking in.
So the big takeaway here is kind of paradoxical, isn't it? A low dose of alcohol didn't make people feel more confident or fluent.
No subjective boost.
But it did lead to objectively better ratings from native speakers, specifically because their pronunciation improved, likely due to reduced anxiety.
Precisely. It suggests that maybe, just maybe, some of the barriers to fluency aren't just about knowing the rules, but about overcoming the psychological hurdle of actually producing the sounds.
Which really makes you think, doesn't it? What other skills or performances in life might be held back more by our own anxiety than by a genuine lack of ability?
It's a great question to ponder.
Absolutely. Well, that was a fascinating look at the science behind a common belief. If you found this deep dive into an Ig Nobel winner interesting, please do subscribe and maybe share it with anyone you know who's wrestling with a second language.
Or perhaps just enjoys a good science story that makes you chuckle. Then think. Until next time on What the Study Says.